we may have to figure out what we want to do going forward. I don't know if we have
Yes.
discussion.
I think we'll have some time at the end to talk
Okay,
about
all right. That's fine.
moving forward. So welcome everyone. I think I know everyone on this group. Welcome Russ and Corey to the PAPREN Parks and Green Space Work Group meeting. This is our September meeting. We are led by our work group co-chairs, Dr. Rich Christiniana, Dr. Jeanette Gestott, and Dr. Sandy Slater. Dr. Gestott and Slater are on the call with us today. And I see Adam is joining.
Hey, Adam.
Welcome. So today, we are doing our little introduction, and we will have a presentation by Dr. Dustin Fry, who will be presenting on his paper, Understanding Perceived Park Access and Physical Activity Among Older Adults. That will be followed up by a Q&A. We'll do a little discussion about what's ahead for upcoming meetings. And then as always, we will leave time at the end of today's meeting for feedback. And if anyone wants to shout out anything that they have going on in their world, share resources and events in the chat, we will have that time. So with that, I would like to introduce Dustin Fry. He is an epidemiologist currently working as a postdoctoral research social scientist at the USDA Forest Service Northern Research Station in Philadelphia. He focuses on urban health issues, including green space, urban tree canopy, physical activity, air pollution, and neighborhood physical disorder, all things that we focus on in this group, with a particular interest in exploring innovative data sources for use in policy relevant research. Excuse me. So with that, I will stop sharing, Dustin, and you will then have full sharing access, and you can take it away with your presentation.
Thank you so much. Are my slides visible in a correct way? Awesome.
Yes.
Thank you. Yeah, so I was excited to get this invitation to talk about this paper. It was published this year, but I did the work on it last year, so it's kind of been fun to dig back into an analysis that feels ages old at this point. The title is kind of broad, Understanding Perceived Park Access and Physical Activity Among Older Adults, but I'll be clear from the start, we are focused just on Philadelphia. So I've been interested in a while on sort of this notion of the correspondence and the differences between subjective measures of neighborhood environments and objective measures of neighborhood environments. I think there's a lot sort of in that. Partly, I think a lot of things that we talk about as objective measurements, like from systematic social observation, wind up coming down to the subjective perception of somebody somewhere down the line. And also because there are so many sort of subjective perceived constructs which we wind up operationalizing in objective or GIS-based ways. One of these is park access, right? This is a subjective notion. How do you feel about whether you have access to a park? But generally in research, we measure this in some kind of objective way, like how close are you to your nearest park? How many parks do you have within a certain buffer distance? These kinds of measures are typically how we operationalize this very subjective construct. And prior research shows that that matters. So for one thing, subjective measures of attitude and perceived park access matter more for understanding park use and park-based physical activity than do objective measures. And secondly, those objective and subjective measures do not always agree, and the level of disagreement can be meaningful. So older residents and lower income residents are both more likely to have stronger mismatches between objective and subjective measures of park access. and residents of economically deprived neighborhoods who live close to parks can still report lower perceived access to parks than do residents of less deprived neighborhoods who live the same distance or even greater distances away. So given, this previous slide, why should we care about the objective measures at all? Why not just focus on the subjective measures of perceived park access if that's what matters? Well, for one thing, objective measures can identify material underserved neighborhoods. Like we know that lower income neighborhoods and neighborhoods with higher proportions of people of color tend to have lower amounts of parks, tend to have lower amounts of tree canopy than do wealthier, whiter neighborhoods. And that objective, disparity should matter and does matter. Secondly, if we have objective measures that matter, then we can set measurable policy targets, which are easier to evaluate than repeatedly doing surveys of people to see what their subjective park access is. But in order for those first two bullets to be meaningful, we need to know what kinds of objectively measured aspects of parks matter. And we think, definitely that they should. So I want to compare just a couple of pictures of two different parks in Philadelphia. Wissahickon Park, which is a very large park with lots of natural spaces, and Love Park, which is located right in Center City, Philadelphia, and is a smaller park with less green space. These are very different parks in a lot of different ways. Both of them are physical activity environments. Wissahickon Park has a lot of hiking trails as well as a long protected access road called Forbidden Drive. Wissahickon Park is frequented by hikers, people walking and biking for both for recreation and for transportation. And then Love Park has lots of physically active events like salsa nights and stuff like that. So these are both physical activity environments, but they have very different objective characteristics. And we should expect that people would respond to these two different parks in different ways as well in a subjective way. So with my collaboration with Professor Russell McIntyre at Lehigh University, we're particularly interested in older adult populations. And for parks, older adults tend to have lower access to parks than younger people do in a lot of different ways. And we could also expect that older adults could have a health behaviors and health outcomes that are in some ways more sensitive to neighborhood environments than younger people. Older adults tend to be more mobility impaired and tend to have lower access to motor vehicle transportation than younger people do. So this should be a special population of interest when we're thinking about the built environment. And there is a body of generally qualitative research, which is aimed at this question of what are the park features that matter the most for older adults. Just to summarize a few, both the presence and the variety of natural features in parks seems to matter. Older adults frequently cite the maintenance of infrastructure and facilities. They want to see a variety of different kinds of parks in a neighborhood. Walking paths are frequently cited as really important for older adult park use. And not just like smooth, level, accessible paths, like we might immediately assume. Older adults would report that they would prefer a variety of kinds of parks, both sloped and unsloped, both paved and unpaved. And then neighborhood characteristics also seem to matter, both neighborhood safety and neighborhood walkability for older adult park preferences and park use. And so the broad hypothesis that I'm operating under here is that there is some set of objectively measured park features which are associated with perceived park access among older adults, and that perceived park access is what could be associated with greater levels of physical activity. So I'm expecting this mediational relationship between some objective park features and physical activity mediated through perceived park access. The specific questions that I'm interested in that framework are, what are those objective characteristics of parks that are associated with perceived park access among older adults in Philadelphia? Does that perceived park access actually mediate a relationship between objective park characteristics and physical activity among older adults? And finally, what role do neighborhood environments play in these relationships? We can answer these questions, I think, using data from the Southeast Pennsylvania Household Health Survey. This is a multi-year cross-sectional survey. There are a lot of different years of data. Unfortunately, they haven't run it in a long time, so the most recent data is 2018. And again, through my collaboration with Russell McIntyre at Lehigh University, I have address level data for older adults in the years 2015 and 2018. Older adults in this survey are operationalized as 60 years and older. And I'm combining 2015 and 2018 into kind of a single unit of analysis here. This is an analysis which is based on residential buffers, and we're focused in Philadelphia because of data access, which I'll get to later. And so we aren't using the full sample of SEPA HHS respondents who live in Philadelphia, because they could have residential buffers that extend beyond Philadelphia where we don't have data. So there's 3 different sample sizes that we're working with 3 different buffer distances, which we're considering. So 250 meters, 500 and 1 kilometer, and we're restricting the sample to people whose entire buffer is within Philadelphia. So we have more people in 250 meter and 500 meter analyses than for the 1 kilometer analysis. It's also important to note that variables do not remain consistent between waves of the household health survey. And so when we're combining years as we're doing here, operationalizing those variables is not always as clean as we would like, because in order to maintain consistency of the variables that we're using, they weren't asked in the same way in every year, and the responses that participants had access to were also not the same in every year. So there's a little bit more data reduction than I would prefer, but we're a little bit stuck with it. What we're drawing from this survey is our main outcome, which is self-reported physical activity. Because of these consistency issues, we're having to sort of binarize this measure of the number of days exercising 30 minutes or more as 0 days exercising 30 minutes or more in an average week, or 1 or more days of exercising 30 minutes or more in a typical week. Our mediator of interest is perceived park access, which is also a binary of no perceived park access or yes perceived park access. The 2018 survey had a variety of no responses, like, yes, there's within a close distance of me, but I don't feel comfortable visiting it during the day, for example. Whereas the 2015 was just this binary. So again, we have to use just this binary for perceived park access. And we're also drawing some individual level controls, those being overall physical health status, mobility, age, race, and income level. I want to talk about the way that we are identifying and operationalizing those park features as well. So this is some imagery of Philadelphia, and we're looking here at a section of Fairmount Park, which is Philadelphia's largest park. And we can see that there are areas of Fairmount Park which are both on the west side and on the east side of the Schuylkill River in Philadelphia. And here at one part in West Fairmount Park, we can see a baseball diamond. Now, a person who lives in the Winfield section of Philadelphia, if we drew a buffer around their residence, we would probably find that they both have access to Fairmount Park and also have spatial access to this baseball diamond. Whereas somebody who lived in the Strawberry Mansion section of Philadelphia still has measurable access to Fairmount Park, but they're on the complete other side of the river from this baseball diamond. And so the distinction that I wanted to draw in this analysis was between you have access to a park that has X set of features versus you actually have spatial access to these features. And we're able to do that in Philadelphia because Philadelphia has publicly accessible maps of individual park features operationalized as point data. And so when we're doing this buffer-based analysis, we can identify whether these individual park features themselves fall within participants' buffer areas, regardless of the amount of that park or the parts of the park which are in that buffer area. If that makes sense. So the park characteristics that we're modeling here are the proportion of each participant's residential buffer, which is comprised of park area, binary indicators for the presence of spray grounds, playgrounds, picnic sites, adult exercise equipment, recreation centers, older adult centers, and comfort stations, the total length of hard and paved trails within parks within the buffer, soft and unpaved trails within parks within the buffer, and then park tree canopy coverage. And this is kind of a, I operationalized this in a very specific way because I wanted to think about tree canopy coverage in parks as a park feature, similar in framework to the rest of the park features. So park level tree canopy coverage for a participant is the level of tree canopy coverage of the park within their buffer, which has the maximum tree canopy coverage of the parks within their buffer. So if they have access to a park with a very high level of tree canopy coverage, then that is the level of tree canopy coverage which is assigned to them for park level tree canopy coverage, regardless of the tree canopy coverage of the any other parks which might also be in their buffer. And then the neighborhood characteristics that we're considering is the length of sidewalk network in the buffer. This is as a measure of neighborhood walkability, which is incorporating both the presence of this pedestrian infrastructure as sidewalks, as well as the density of the sidewalk network. So we're kind of getting both of those elements. The total tree canopy coverage of the buffer, and also the spatial density of Part 1 serious crime incidents from police data. And in order to analyze this, I wanted to fit structural equation modeling path models. They're structural equation models, but they are path models because we aren't actually modeling any latent variables as part of this. I had seen some papers and like poster presentations using this sort of method, and I really liked, that everything could be simultaneously estimated and that we could have nice diagrams with little parameter estimates on each of our lines of our DAG. I thought that was fun, and so I wanted to try it, particularly because I was so interested in this mediational pathway here. I wound up estimating so many different parameter estimates that I never bothered making a path diagram that included individual parameters. It would be completely unreadable. But we do have sort of this summarized diagram of how the models were fitted. We have both direct and indirect relationships estimated between our individual park features and physical activity, direct and indirect through perceived park access. And then in this first model, we're controlling for both individual level participant characteristics as well as neighborhood characteristics, and sort of to somewhat reduce the total number of parameters that we're estimating. These confounders are controlling, there's relationships between them and the park area and buffer, but not these other indicators. I'm hoping that controlling for these through the park area and the buffer gets rid of a lot of the other confounding without having to estimate just this incredibly massive number of parameters. Maybe you disagree with that approach, but that's what I've tried here. Oh, I should also say there's two other kinds of park features which are also available in the data. These are the number of boat launches and environmental education centers. Boat launches are only in a very specific area of Philadelphia along the Schuylkill River, and there's only one listed environmental education center in the data. So these wound up giving singular model fits, and I had to drop them and leaving with these set of park features. So from this model, what did we find? So just to summarize, in 250 and in 500-meter buffer models, we found that total park coverage and park tree canopy coverage were both positively and significantly associated with perceived park access. And we found that perceived park access was positively associated with physical activity. So this mediational relationship, which we hypothesized, is present in the 250 and 500-meter buffer models. And it's the total park area and park tree canopy coverage, which we're finding being, these significant parameters of interest. We also found some other things in the models. These first two, I think, are important because they are replicating prior findings and I think giving support to this approach. We see that age is negatively associated with perceived park access in the 250 and 500-meter models. And we also find, consistent with prior work, that females perceive lower park access than males do in this sample. And as we would probably expect, we also found that participants with a poor self-reported health status are reporting lower perceived park access, again, in those 250 and 500-meter buffer models than participants with better health status. And participants who are above 200% of the poverty line were also reporting greater park access than participants below 200% of the poverty line. I have less confidence in these results that we're finding because they were only found in a single model each rather than across some multiple set of buffer sizes. In the 250-meter models, we found that comfort stations and pools were negatively associated with perceived park access and with physical activity, respectively. In the 500-meter model, we found that picnic sites were negatively associated with physical activity. And very surprising to me, or excuse me, no, sorry. That should be 1,000 meters. At 1,000-meter buffer, we are seeing that the total length of paved trails in parks is positively associated with physical activity, although we did not see that relationship at other buffer sizes. However, all of these models have really bad model fit. So I also wanted to fit some reduced models focused on these significant findings that we did identify, and also to sort of settle a disagreement which I had with my advisor, Michelle Kondo, about these models. So I wanted to operationalize neighborhood characteristics as effect measure modifiers of the relationship between objectively measured park features and perceived park access, with my thought being that for people with the same amount of park features, we would expect that neighborhood characteristics, like if they have no sidewalk connecting their residence with the parks, that will reduce their measured relationship between park features and perceived park access. So I wanted to fit this reduced model using neighborhood characteristics as an effect measure modifier. My advisor disagreed. She saw the neighborhood characteristics as confounders of this relationship. So to sort of get at this idea in our reduced models, we fit both of these, both fitting this as an effect measure modifier for neighborhood characteristics and as a confounder. And what we found was that in both the 250-meter and 500-meter buffer sizes, which is all that we fit for these reduced models, we found that the root mean squared error of approximation showed much better model fit for those confounding models than for the interaction models. This approach doesn't confirm or preclude any sort of causal relationships or causal framework, but as my advisor would have expected, we are seeing much better model fit when we're considering those as confounders than as effect measure modifiers. That's for root mean squared error of approximation. For all of these models, we're seeing like minimum comparative fit index. It was set at 0 for all models. That's as low as it can go. Even though the root mean squared error approximation was showing really good model fit. This can apparently be if there is a low amount of overall variance in our outcome of physical activity, which is explained by any of the variables in the model. That could explain the inconsistent model fit as we're seeing it here. So I have a few sort of takeaways from this. One, we are in part replicating some of these qualitative park preference studies by again finding this importance of park tree canopy coverage for older adults' perceptions of park access. However, other findings from the qualitative work we are not replicating. Particularly, we aren't seeing important relationships with walking trails and perceived park access or really physical activity either. One potential for why we're seeing this is that with these data, we were not able to distinguish overall physical activity of our participants from our participants' physical activity, which was actually taking place in parks. And we're also sacrificing detail for spatial comprehensiveness. So in order to get every single park in Philadelphia, every single map park feature in Philadelphia, we aren't getting any sort of detailed information about the level of park maintenance, the amount of litter in parks, things like that. And although prior work is showing the importance of a variety of well-maintained vegetation, a variety of natural looking vegetation, the only information about vegetation that we have is the tree canopy coverage in this case. However, despite these, this work does seem to support the role of parks for older adult physical activity, because we are seeing both relationships between perceived park access and physical activity levels, and we're seeing that mediational relationship between the amount of park access or the amount of park area in a buffer and physical activity levels mediated through perceived park access. And again, we're supporting this importance of vegetation with that significant relationship that we found with park tree canopy coverage. So thank you again for this invitation. And if you're wanting to, look at our tables of results and things in more detail, that publication is open access, accessible through this link.
Thank you so much, Dustin. It looks like there's a few questions in the chat from Dr. Gestott. Is the comfort station a restroom? And
Yeah.
similarly, is the spray ground water, like a water play or splash pad? Or what is a spray ground?
Yeah, I think we can pretty much think about those as splash pads. In Philadelphia, there's a few that are like just water coming straight out of the ground. I know there's also splash pads that have sort of like vertical structures. And yeah, comfort stations include restrooms. Oh yeah, I'll link the article in the chat.
Yeah, and then my other question was about the confounding, that debate. So, you can't always test for confounding, but sometimes you can examine it with numbers. And so I didn't know if you did any of that.
Not in a particularly exciting way. In those reduced models, I was dropping assumed confounders that were not significant in the full model. But I didn't examine the extent to which the presence of confounders was affecting the strength of relationships of interest. That said, just qualitatively through all of my playing around with model fit and stuff, the strength of the relationships of interest tended not to vary much depending on how the models, depending on what was in the models. But I didn't do much of a formal analysis of confounding.
Okay. Michelle, you said you worked with. Yeah, I worked with Michelle on a project in New Orleans as well. So tell her
wonderful.
She's here.
Yeah, she's not in the office today, but
Okay. Yeah.
I'll tell her you said hi.
Does anyone else have any questions for Dustin?
Just have a comment, maybe more of a comment. I know like in the park space for professionals in the field, the big interest is around trying to have parks within a 10-minute walk for the majority of the population. And so I'm trying to think about how this study can connect to that campaign, if you will. Is it something to consider in terms of the age group? Something that, you know, I'm just wondering how you perceive or how you interpret your findings connecting to that national campaign that's really being pushed out across the country.
Yeah, I I don't know. I think honestly this is the wrong urban context for this analysis to answer that kind of question, just because um I don't remember off the top of my head what the percentage is in Philadelphia, but we have one of the higher um percentages of that relationship. Almost everybody in Philadelphia is within a 10-minute walk of a park. So
Right.
I suspect that we don't really have enough variance in that kind of measure across our sample to satisfyingly answer that question. I think in Philadelphia, there's sort of a different sort of issue, particularly with these objective measures, which is that there is a really tremendous disparity between parks in terms of park size. So we have these, Philadelphia has both, we call them watershed parks because they were originally implemented to protect water quality of significant streams in Philadelphia, which tend to be very large, particularly Wissahickon Park, particularly Fairmount Park, which surrounds the Schuylkill. These really, really, really big parks that a lot of people have access to. However, in like North and South Philadelphia and parts of West Philadelphia, there's dense neighborhoods that have very large distances between the average person and one of these large parks. These parks, which they're in a 10-minute walk of, are much smaller, probably much less vegetated on average. That I think is a different kind of question, but I do think it's an important one. Um, and I know that's true in other cities as well, like Baltimore. Um, Thinking about social disparities and access to parks in Baltimore, um, uh, for Black neighborhoods have better access to a number of parks than do wealthier, whiter neighborhoods. But wealthier, whiter neighborhoods have more overall park area than the poor Black neighborhoods. So yeah, I think the Philadelphia context is more about that difference than the 10-minute walk measure.
Yeah, and I think your distinction at the beginning was powerful about the difference between perception and subjection versus objection. And I think that's what's going out the 10-minute is that it's very objective in nature.
Yeah.
And I think you're making a case for we got to consider the perception and maybe even age group differences too, right? So
Right. Oh, does everyone in Philadelphia perceive that parks are a 10-minute walk away?
yeah.
I don't know. I would really suspect not. But I don't know.
Yeah, and I was also just thinking about that 10 minutes, especially in the older adult population. Does 10 minutes seem like a long walk? Like by the time they get there, they're ready to turn around and head back, and that was their exercise for the day.
Yeah.
Without like actually getting to walk around the park because they're already so tired. So
And maybe the 10 minutes, it doesn't apply to them. Maybe it's 30 minutes for them.
Right.
To get there, yeah.
good question. Anyone else have something for Dustin?
Are you, are you following this up? What are you currently working on?
I have a few different projects. The most related to this is are you familiar with the land care randomized control trial in Philadelphia?
Tell me that one. Land.
Yeah, so there's a program to clean and green vacant lots.
Oh, is that with
Philadelphia.
Charlie? With Dr. Branis? Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So yes.
And
I didn't know the name.
Yeah. that work, because in large part because of him, that was rolled out in a way that allowed them to do really good longitudinal work and randomized controlled work on changes to neighborhoods following that implementation. What I'm working on now is weaker than that in some ways because it's a cross-sectional analysis, but also using this same population representative data from the Southeast Pennsylvania Household Health Survey. I'm seeing whether access to land care lots seems to be protective of health and health-related outcomes in that population. We're finding that it doesn't seem to be in this cross-sectional data.
It doesn't?
It does not seem to be. Like I think there's a few possible ways that we could interpret that. One, certainly because the land care sites were targeted at neighborhoods with, you know, high levels of vacancy. If you have a land care lot near you, you're probably in a more deprived neighborhood on average than if you don't. So they would have to probably do a lot in order for us to see a signal of protection. And then secondly, I think both from the qualitative work as well as our findings from this paper, I don't think the characteristics of the land care lots we should necessarily expect to be protected for older adults. One, still with the qualitative work, they tend not to have any sort of walking trails. They tend not to have facilities or really infrastructure at all. The minimum land care lot is
they're
a
small.
fenced field. And secondly, yeah, they're really small.
Yeah, we're doing the same thing in New Orleans with the Healthy Neighborhood Project, and Charlie and Michelle are both advising us on that project. Yeah. Interesting.
Great. Well, if there's no other questions, I want to say thank you so much to Dustin.
Yeah, thank you. This has been
great.
great. Really interesting.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. It was very interesting.
Wonderful. So next we will talk a little bit more about what is up next for our monthly meetings. And so I'm going to pass it to Dr. Slater and potentially Dr. Gustat to give more information.
And Dustin, you're welcome to stay and join our network or be on the listserv and participate in any way that you'd like. We'd love to have you.
Thank you. Yeah,
I'll send you some of the PAPREN
be a part of
information.
This,
yeah. Thank you, Emily. Yeah, make sure you've got everything.
Yeah, so Jeanette, feel free to add to what I'm going to say. I think at this point, this is going to be the last time that this group is going to meet in this form. This is the end of this round of PAPREN. The new funding for PAPREN has not been announced yet, but there are some exciting things in the works for it, and we will keep the group updated as we find them. Jeanette,
yeah.
I don't know if you have more recent information.
No, but we can, mainly it's because our fellow, Emily, our paid fellow is ending. So the group, the rest of us aren't paid, and the rest of us just meet on interest, and we get together monthly to talk about different people's projects or to work on projects or to say we should do this, and then we form a group and do that. So those of us can still do that. We are losing Emily's curating and corralling ability of getting us all in scheduled monthly meetings and finding great speakers. So that's the thing we're losing. I think we can still continue to meet no matter what happens with the funding as an interest group, as a professional interest group of both practitioners and researchers. So, you know, Dustin, your first time, and I know some of you others have been here for a while, but this we'll have to make a plan for how we go forward without the support of the fellow. But we can still continue to meet as definitely an interest group of folks interested in physical activity research and policy around parks and green spaces. So just wanted to put that plug in for, you know, for that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you, Emily, for your service.
Well, and
absolutely.
And just building on that, the larger PAPREN network that includes more than just our work group is going to be continuing on as well.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I
Right.
did see that.
So we'll at least
So,
be having some way to gather. And yeah, we don't know. So
yes. So with that being said, the next meeting date has not been established, but look out for communication from myself. I'll be ensuring that the transition is smooth, so I'm not just leaving.
well, thank you, Emily.
And
Appreciate that.
absolutely. And that we will continue these meetings in some capacity. Moving
Maybe so,
forward.
we tend to run into each other at some conferences like APHA or at Active Living Conference or behavioral medicine or something. Sometimes there's little groups of us that get together.
Yes, absolutely. Yes, it's a great group. And the last item, so does anyone have any comments about that or suggestions? Those are on this call. And then I was going to say the last thing is any open announcements or events that you want to plug to this group. I will also be sharing it with our larger email group for whoever didn't join today. Anything going on that you want to announce, share? Nothing? Okay.
Do we know, is there, I mean, APHA is coming up at the end of the month, and I think, is PAPREN doing something, Jeanette? Have you heard, or are they having some kind of gathering?
I haven't heard.
Okay. Well, if we find out that there's some kind of formal or even informal meeting scheduled, we'll send it out to the group.
Yes, absolutely.
I just want to put in a plug for the Go Summit in San Antonio and the Active Enviro Think Tank, all coming up in November. Sorry about my screen being so fuzzy. I'm outside. I don't know what's going on.
There you go.
I'm
Got
using my
pollen
hand
on.
face and I think I hit my thumbprints all over it. Anyway, yeah, I just want to point out that the Go Summit is in San Antonio and it's combined with the think tank. You can do a combined registration for that, and you can find that on the Active Enviro website.
Emily just put the link in the chat, so it's there.
Invite you guys to come. It'd be great to see you.
And it's
Thank you.
November 17th through 20th, I see.
Yeah. Yes.
In San Antonio, Texas.
Yeah.
If you want to register. Thank you, Robbie.
Sure.
Anyone else? If not, then we can end it there for today. But thank you so much, everyone. It has been a pleasure organizing these meetings. Again, I won't be going away immediately, so look out for more communication for subsequent meetings for this group.
Oh, thank you.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's been great. I hope we can continue to see each other and meet and talk about issues related to physical activity and parks and green space and outdoor spaces and in general.
Yes, absolutely.
All right, Russ and Adam and Corey, nice to see y'all. Thanks for coming. And Dustin, thank you so much. Really appreciate hearing about it.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the invitation. It's great to meet all of you.
Thanks, everyone.
Great.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, thank
Next
you.
time.
All right.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.